So, reading the reports on the various group findings about the hand of Leonardo in the Verrocchio painting, it was very enjoyable and very good to see really strong collaborative thinking. I got the sense that folks enjoyed the problem solving aspect of this assignment. And in fact, these problem solving skills that you were testing out here do have a real world application. So here's a very famous painting. You'll recognize the gesture, Salvator Mundi, right? So Jesus as savior of the world. You learned about that with the Albrecht Dürer painting, the self-portrait, in which he sort of evokes this famous gesture of Jesus blessing. So this is a very famous example because this was only recently in the last few years or so attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. And you can actually go on Wikipedia and read about that attribution. So attribution is to identify an artwork as being by a certain artist, to state who created it. And this can be something that is done through historical documents, but it also can be done through visual evidence, which is what you were working with in your assignment. So if you read on about this, it's very interesting because there's debate. The painting has been attributed in whole or in part. The question is, did Leonardo da Vinci paint this entirely? Did he paint parts of it? Very similar to the job you were doing. And you can read and see that many, and they say in fact most leading scholars, have solidly stated, based on their evidence that they've weighed, that yes, it's by Leonardo, but not everyone is completely convinced. And a lot is riding on this attribution. In fact, 450.3 million to be exact. That's what it's sold for by Christie's. Now, you didn't have $450 million riding on your attribution, but you did the exact same scholarly analytic moves that these famous art historians did in regards to this painting. So you all groups, clearly evident in your posts, were using visual evidence effectively because you were using visual evidence in a systematic way. You were isolating variables that are indicative of the artist's style. And you were considering each variable piece by piece, one by one, such as anatomical makeup, right? Such as anatomical tortion, such as emotion. That's what it means to be systematic, looking at each variable independently of the others. And, Amanda's group got me thinking about what a fantastic job they did with being very aware of and explicit about their methodology. So they say, we basically, our group was looking at these comparisons, Virgin of the Rocks, the Mona Lisa, and the Baptism of Christ. We were laying them side by side in order to identify and differentiate. That's so effective, sophisticated, very authoritative as a thinker to lay out your method in the beginning. And actually, that's what the scholars did with the Salvator Mundi painting. In fact, if you do decide to read through all of the details of the Wikipedia article, they'll talk about the process of attribution way down after they list the money that was paid. That always comes first. And they talk about the fact that the director of the National Gallery in London, a very prestigious, important museum, he actually was involved in this process of making an attribution by conducting a side-by-side study of the Salvator Mundi and the Virgin of the Rocks, which is in their collection. So that's the exact method that Amanda's group was doing. The same kind of thought about we need to compare something specific to our mystery object. Another thing that Amanda's group really stood out for is their very precise focus on tiny telling details. We have found that the medial angel in the Baptism of Christ has her hands crossed very similarly to that of the hands of the Mona Lisa. Bingo! Jackpot! Tiny, easily overlooked details like the hands are often hugely important. One of the most famous art historians to sort of codify and develop The craft of making attributions was an Italian named Morelli. And his point was that you should look at little out of the way things like the ears, something that you might overlook. And those can actually be the best clues rather than the central element. And indeed, those angels have been verified as Leonardo da Vinci's work. Did he have a hand in other elements? It's unclear. He may well have. We can't say for certain. We do know, based on the contract and the kinds of contracts that were common at the time, is that the Verrocchio was required to do the major figures, to do John the Baptist, to do Jesus, because basically the patron of the artwork, the ones commissioning the artwork, wanted their money's worth. And from their point of view, getting their money's worth meant that the master of the studio did the main figures. The unknown beginning apprentice could do those little angels. Too bad when it's Leonardo da Vinci and now you wish he'd done everything. So did he have some hand maybe assisting in something like the curls? Quite possibly. The water? Quite possibly. But this is the limitation of visual evidence, is it takes us only so far. We also have to rely on historical evidence, things like contrast and documents. Did I say contrast? I meant to say contracts, the contract signed between the commissioning patron and the artist. And that's why even with the best visual analysts in the business, we're not 100% sure about everything in this painting. There's not enough doubt to bring it down from 450 million. Copies of this painting have been made and have sold for like 200,000 really good copies. That's what a good copy of the Mona Lisa sells for. But in terms of you and what you're learning, you may never have an opportunity to weigh in with your interpretation and your analysis of a painting like this. But you should know that these skills are considered highly valuable. So for instance, my friend Beth Dungan, who is an art historian, teaches art history to medical students, doctors to be at UCSF, because they recognize that this kind of skill, visual attention to what's subtle pieces of evidence, is hugely important to a medical professional. So remember that when you think about what you've learned in art history.